Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Yud Aleph is primarily focused on the concept of mistakes that people make. There is a lengthy discussion about machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon, which includes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, about when we make a gezerah that somebody might make a mistake and when we do not make a gezerah. The Gemara will compare and contrast lots of different types of situations in which either the Rabbanon or Rabbi Yehuda hold you make a gezerah and the other does not. The Gemara would like to understand why sometimes each one makes gezerahs and sometimes each one does not make gezerahs. After that we get to Mishnah. Mishnah gets us to the concept of the Isser D'Rabbanan to eat chametz earlier than the Isser D'Oraisa to eat chametz, which is also a halacha based around mistakes, because the reason the Chachamim said that stop eating chametz earlier is because we were afraid people would make a mistake in the time. The Gemara following that will go into mistakes that witnesses could possibly have when they testify about the same incident. How much of a difference between the witnesses' testimony can we accept as being chalked up to a mistake, and how much we have to assume is because they're lying and they did not see the same incident. So the beginning of the daf is discussing a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon, which is talking about whether or not you're allowed to do bedikas chametz once the time of Isser chametz has begun. When it's already usher to eat chametz, are you allowed to do bedikas chametz? Obviously, you're supposed to do it earlier. The question is, if you forgot, can you do it now? So Rabbi Yehuda says you can't, because if you're busy looking for chametz, you may actually find chametz, and if you find chametz, you may eat the chametz. It's forbidden to eat now, so therefore don't go looking for chametz lest you get yourself into the position of eating it. The Chachamim say you do not make a gezerah like that. Now the Gemara is going to compare this to a lot of other instances in which we make a gezerah. If somebody's handling something, he may eat it, or he may use it. That's going to be our first sugya. How come here we say either, according to Rabbi Yehuda, gezerah you may eat it, or the Chachamim, we don't say gezerah you may eat it, and in other cases we do say that, or the opposite. Then we'll get into general gezerahs, where you are afraid that people may confuse something mutter with something usher, not necessarily about being able to hold yourself back from doing something that is attractive and forbidden. So the Gemara's first discussion is as follows. Like we've seen, Rabbi Yehuda says we do make gezerah, you may come to eat the chametz after this man isser, and the Chachamim say you don't. The Gemara compares that first of all to the case of barley or grain which is harvested before the Korban Omer. You know the halacha is you're not allowed to eat it before the Korban Omer. The question is, are you allowed to harvest it? So we have seen there the opposite halacha seems to come up. Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to harvest it before the Korban Omer. We're not afraid you're going to eat it. Rabbi Meir, who's going to represent the Chachamim here, says no, you should not be doing that. People used to do it and it wasn't correct because we're afraid you may end up eating it. And the Gemara wants to resolve both of these contradictions, both Rabbi Yehuda against Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir against the Chachamim, who are the same individual counted here. So the Gemara first of all discusses Rabbi Yehuda against Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara brings a couple of resolutions over here. The Gemara's first explanation is from Rava, and he says that in the case of the chametz, there is no siman. There's nothing to remind you that you're not allowed to eat chametz during this time. In the case of the barley, the grain that's picked before the Korban Omer, you are only allowed to pick it by hand, and that's halacha. You're not allowed to use a sickle or any other kind of tool or device, and that will help you remember. Now, even during the grinding and the sifting of the grain, you still have to do some sort of siman. You can't use a water mill, you have to use a hand mill, and you have to take the sifter and you have to turn it upside down. That way you'll remember that you're not supposed to eat it. Now the Gemara has a question though, because we know that the halacha is that all this is only true in fields that you could take the Korban Omer from. Fields that you can't take the Korban Omer from because it's a low quality grain, such as mountaintops or very wet valleys. Places like this, you are actually allowed to pick without a siman. Now, what are you going to do then? You may come to eat the grain over there also. So the Gemara therefore rejects this pshat, and the Gemara says, no, Rabbi Yehuda is actually as follows. Chametz, he's afraid you're going to eat. The grain, you're not going to eat because people naturally remove themselves from chadash, from new grain, before the Korban Omer all the time. Not just close to the actual Omer itself. People are naturally bedili mine, they keep away from it. Chametz is bread. Bread you eat all year. Just like you eat bread all year, you may end up eating bread. Now, you do not naturally consider bread to be something forbidden for you, and therefore you may easily slip into making a mistake. Now, the Gemara brings an abortive attempt to offer another explanation by Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says that the only thing that's permitted is grain and flour that's roasted, which is not edible. And the Gemara asks, but how did it get to its not edible state? It had to have been edible beforehand. Once you dry it out and you roast it, it becomes not edible. But at some point before that, you are allowed to process it until there, and it was edible at that point. The Gemara therefore rejects this, and it says it's not a real explanation. Okay. Now the Gemara wants to know the Rabbanan against Rabbanan, and here we have a simple answer. The Rabbanan, in the case of chametz, don't say that you need to make Xer because you're busy looking for it. You're busy destroying the chametz. You're involved in the act of destroying chametz. You're not going to make a mistake and eat it by accident. Chametz is the most horrendous thing for you to find at this point. However, in the case of the barley, people do make a mistake and come to eat the barley before the carbon armor is brought, and therefore you shouldn't deal with grain before it's permitted, so you shouldn't be harvesting or grinding or all these things before the carbon armor is brought. Okay, now the Gemara brings another case, and the Gemara wants to compare this again to our original case of chametz. And this case is about oil which is set up to drip into a candle on Shabbos. You know that the halach is you're not allowed to take that oil. It's set up, it's part of the candle. If you were to take that oil, you would cause the candle to go out too soon, and that would be a malacha of mechabe. The question is, are we afraid that you're going to take that oil from the candle? So this is Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim again, and the Tanna Kama say that you cannot, that you should not set up oil to drip in that way, lest you may take that oil away. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you're not going to take the oil, or, well, he doesn't say why, but he says you're allowed to. You're allowed to set up the oil to drip, and you don't have to worry about it. So the Gemara has, again, contradictions. How come Rabbi Yehuda over here says you don't have to worry about it, but in the case of chametz, he does make Xer, you may end up eating the chametz. So the Gemara says, well, Shabbos is very chamer, and therefore Shabbos, people naturally are very stringent about the laws of Shabbos, and therefore you won't make a mistake to take the oil. Chametz, people aren't so impressed, and people may end up eating the chametz before the time. The Chachamim, again, we don't have a problem because we could say the same answer. The Chachamim say, chametz, you're not going to make a mistake because you're looking for it. This is what you're involved in destroying. In the case of the oil, though, it's just sitting there, you have no relationship with it, and therefore you may end up taking that oil, which would be forbidden. The Gemara now moves into contradictions between this halacha about the oil on Shabbos and other halachos of Shabbos. And here you cannot distinguish that Shabbos has a special chumrah because we're talking about contradictions between all Shabbos halachos. So in this case of the oil, we saw that Rabbi Yehuda says it's permitted. We're not afraid that you're going to take from the oil, and the Chachamim say it's forbidden. However, in discussing a rope that tore, the rope that holds the pail of water that you lower to the bottom of the well, so over there, the Chachamim say you aren't allowed to retie the rope, obviously, that would be a malacha of kosher, but you are allowed to make a bow, like a slip knot. And Rabbi Yehuda says you can't do that, you have to take a article of clothing, like a strap from your socks or something that was used to hold up the top of the stocking. You take that and just wrap it around the handle of the pail. You can't even make a bow. So Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to make a bow, and apparently he's afraid that if you're going to make a bow, you're going to end up tying a real knot. And the Chachamim say that there's no such concern. So again, a contradiction. So the Gemara says not a contradiction. The Rabbanan say, look, oil is easily confused with other oil. You, just like you're allowed to take other oil, you'll end up taking this oil. Bows and knots are not confused, and therefore we don't make Xer when you say you're allowed to make a knot. Now Rabbi Yehuda, the reason why he says you shouldn't make the bow, the Gemara says, is not because they're afraid that if we let you make a bow, you're going to end up making a knot. The problem is that a bow itself is an Isser of Kshira. According to Rabbi Yehuda, he holds that a bow is not mutter to tie on Shabbos, even if it never becomes a knot. The Gemara now asks another contradiction within the Rabbanan. Here we saw that the Rabbanan are not afraid that if we allow you to make a bow, you'll end up making a knot. But as far as what rope you're going to use, so there's a different Mishnah that says, "Machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, are you allowed to use a rope?" And it can't mean a regular rope because nobody would say you're allowed to make a knot with a regular rope. It means a weaver's rope, which is very weak and ordinarily would break. So there, Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to use a weaver's rope to tie the pail, and the Chachamim say you're not, because if you'll be allowed to use the weaver's rope, you'll end up using a regular rope. So you see the Chachamim do make Xer. If you allow you to use a weaver's rope, you'll make a regular rope. But here we say you're allowed to make a bow and not afraid of going and end up making a knot. So the Gemara says yes, people get confused between different types of knots. They don't get confused between different types of ropes. If we allow you to use a mutter kind of rope, you're not going to end up using the wrong kind of rope. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to what we said earlier. We said that Rabbi Yehuda distinguishes between the type of Isser that people naturally repel themselves from and things that people are used to and are accustomed to using. Such as, for example, chametz, we said people generally eat bread, so therefore they don't repel themselves from bread, but carbon aimer people are naturally avoiding, they're not accustomed to using it. Now the Gemara's question is about a bechor. The halacha is that a bechor is a carbon, has to be brought as a carbon unless it gets a mum, but it's forbidden for the owner to put a mum in the carbon. Now what if the animal, which is a bechor, is dying? Are you allowed to do bloodletting? Now the bloodletting may save its life. On the other hand, the bloodletting may make a mum. You're not allowed to make a mum. It's an isur d'oraisa to make a mum in a carbon or in a bechar. Now, that's something that people naturally repel themselves from. Nobody's walking around very used to making mumin, wounds, in animals. So, there is a way to do the bloodletting without making a permanent wound, something which won't heal. As long as what you're doing will heal as it was before, it's fine. But there's also a way to do it that will make a mum. So, the Chachamim say you're allowed to bloodlet as long as you're careful not to make a mum that will not heal. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, we're afraid if we let you make a mum, then if we let you bloodlet, you're going to end up doing it in such a way that's going to make a mum. You'll make a mistake. So the Gemara is bothered. Why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, would you say that people are going to get mixed up here? Didn't we say that if you are naturally repelled from something, you're not going to end up doing it by accident? Just like we said, you're naturally repelled from carbon aimer, so you won't come to eat the grain before the carbon aimer is brought. So Gemara answers, here there's another svara. Here's a monetary loss. Your animal's dying, and therefore you're very nervous. You're very stressed about saving it. When you're stressed, you make mistakes, and therefore if we allow you to make a mum, if we allow you to bloodlet, you can end up making a mum that'll violate the Isser d'oraisa. Now the Chachamim say, you may be stressed, but if we don't allow you to do anything, then you're going to be even more stressed. You're going to watch your animal die, there's nothing you can do, you'll end up just not listening to us and bloodletting anyway, and then you won't pay any attention to what you're doing, and you'll almost certainly make a mum in a case like that. The Gemara now has a contradiction to this, coming from a case of brushing an animal. The halacha is that you are not allowed to brush an animal with a metal comb. It can scratch it and cause a wound which will draw blood. That's a problem to do on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to draw blood on Yom Tov. However, you're allowed to brush it with a wooden comb. That's not going to draw blood. That is what Rabbi Yehuda holds. But the Chachamim say, no, we don't want you to use a wooden comb either, because if you let you use a wooden comb, you may end up using a metal comb. So now again, Rabbi Yehuda is in contradiction, because this is a case of monetary loss. You need to clean the animal for its health and for its comfort. So therefore, he's allowing you to use the wooden comb. But if people are very nervous and stressed about dealing with their money, then you may end up using a metal comb. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say it's okay? So the Gemara says, well, here it's different. The animal's not dying. It's uncomfortable. You're not so stressed about the discomfort of the animal. It's not going to cause you a financial loss. You're not that stressed to come to make a mistake and use the wrong type of comb. So now the Gemara says, well, why generally don't you make Gzeira? We've seen before that Rabbi Yehuda says Gzeira from chametz, that you shouldn't look for chametz. But over here he doesn't make Gzeira, you may use the wrong comb. So the Gemara says, well, it's very simple. Combs are not easily confused. Bread is confused with other types of bread. Matzah and chametz are both bread, so they're easily mixed up. You're allowed to eat matzah, you may end up eating chametz. But combs, I'm allowed to use my wooden comb. I'm not allowed to use my metal comb. Now we get the next Mishnah, which discusses the hours that Chazal added onto the time when it's forbidden to own or eat chametz. We know that midaraisa you have to destroy and may not eat any chametz from the end of the 6th hour of the day on Erev Pesach. We have 3 opinions in the Mishnah as to how far prior to that Chazal backed it up. According to Avi Meir, we backed up the Yisar Achila on the time of burning 1 hour, not at the end of the 6th hour, but at the beginning of the 6th hour. From the end of the 5th, beginning of the 6th, it's already forbidden to eat chametz and it has to be burnt then. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we split the halacha. At the end of the 4th, it's forbidden to eat. At the end of the 5th, you have to burn it. the end of the sixth, it will be Aser Daraisa. According to Gamliel, we split halacha, but not between eating and burning. We split it between chulin and truma. Chulin, you should stop eating at the end of the fourth hour. It doesn't matter if it goes to waste, it's just chulin, it has no kedusha. Truma, though, has kedusha, you don't want it to go to waste, and therefore you can keep eating it until the end of the fifth, but you do have to burn it from the end of the fifth, beginning of the sixth, because you have to back up the time by 1 hour. Okay, now the Gemara discusses the amount of mistakes that people can make in timing. How do they get times wrong? And the sugya we're referring to is when two witnesses come to court and they say, we saw somebody kill somebody else. So the halacha is that the Sanhedrin interviews both of them independently and separately, and then we compare their answers. And if they don't match, they don't drive, they don't fit together, then we invalidate their testimony. We say that it's not valid, not necessarily because they're lying, but the assumption is that they're lying. It's called edus mukashas, and it's invalidated, and you throw out the case, and you do not punish the person that they're accusing. The question is, how much of a mistake is acceptable? And it's not contradictory. It's just a natural mistake that people make. So the Mishnah says that if they're off by the day of the month, they're off by 1 day, that's okay, because maybe one of them knew that it was a leap month, and one of them didn't know it was a leap month, or vice versa. So they could be off by 1 day. If they're off by 2 days, then it's already contradictory testimony and it's invalidated. What if they're off by a couple of hours? So if they're off by 1 hour, that's okay. People can be off by an hour. One says, let's say, the third hour, one says the fourth hour. But if they're off by 2 hours, so according to Rabbi Meir, it's invalidated, because nobody's off by 2 hours. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it depends which 2 hours. If it's, let's say, the middle of the day between the third hour, the fifth hour, that's okay. People can make a mistake like that. If hour is the fifth hour, the seventh hour, you don't confuse the fifth hour and the seventh hour of the day. The shadows are different. The sun is in a very different position in the sky. It's very noticeable if you're in the fifth hour that it's not the seventh hour, and if you're in the seventh hour it's not the fifth hour. It couldn't be that one of them is making a mistake, and therefore it's contradictory testimony. So now Abaye has interesting ways of understanding this machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. On the surface of it seems that Rabbi Meir says you can make a mistake by 1 hour, and Rabbi Yehuda says you can make a mistake by 2 hours, depending on the time of the day itself. So the explanation according to Abaye is as follows. When they're off by 1 hour, it's not a mistake. When they're off by 1 hour, they mean the same time, they're just expressing it in different words. And the Gemara has two ways of explaining this. Either that one of them says the third hour, he means the end of the third hour, and the other one says the fourth hour, he means the beginning of the fourth hour, and they're both referring to the border between the third and the fourth hour, and it's not a contradiction at all. The other explanation is that they're off by a minute or two. Yeah, one it's 2:59 and one is at 3:01. They're not off by an hour. One it says in the 2 o'clock hour, and one means in the 3 o'clock hour, but it's really off by just a little bit. That's not a problem. Everybody agrees that that's okay. The question is, can you add an hour to that? According to Rabbi Yehuda, you can add an hour to that mistake because people could be off by a half an hour, and therefore the actual time of the crime was midway between one's time and the other's time, and they're both off by half an hour, and that's why they came up with a difference of an hour. So that means even though they say 2 hours apart, they're really only making a mistake of up to half an hour. Their 1 hour is lost in translation in how they express the language. Are they referring to, when they say the hour, do they mean the beginning of the hour or the end of the hour? And the other hours, they're off by half an hour each, and therefore they end up being an hour apart. According to the second version, they're off by a few minutes. That's acceptable according to everybody. Question is, can they be off by up to an hour? Rabbi Yehuda says again they can be off by up to an hour, half an hour apart each, and Rabbi Meir says no, we can't be off by that extra.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.